everybody to the last forum in the series, and maybe we saved the best for last. This is International Education Week, and so we have Eric Torres from Education Studies in honor of that, and I'll just turn it over to you to introduce your topic.
Thank you very much. Hello, thank you for coming. My name is Eric. As you know, I'm in the Education Studies Department, and I have been very involved in immersion experiences overall, both domestic and international. And I, as a former classroom teacher and school administrator, believe that a lot and most of the learning happens outside the classroom. But that needs careful crafting and engineering. So today I wanted to make a presentation to share some of those findings with you. So this is about my research that I'm doing with the help of undergraduate students. I'm proud to say that I've taken already 23 students with me to Peru in the past 4 years, and I'm planning to take 4 more this coming summer. But at the same time, I've taken more than 400 students in domestic immersion experiences. Try to do the same that I'm going to share with you today, but in a local setting, but having that global mindset already as a plan. So I'm going to invite you to switch gears. I was explaining earlier to Kelly that when I speak about spring, in my head, that's September. Right, because I'm from the southern hemisphere. And I always have to double check myself because I keep doing it and I forget where I am. And that's a common mistake when we are teaching. We just assume. And we have to be, deliberate in setting the markers for the teaching and learning environment. So I'm going to invite you to look at this picture. Actually, it's an oil. It's a huge oil that is exhibited in a church, in a temple in Cusco, Peru. It's by the Peruvian artist Miguel Aracu Cartagena. So I have my notes here. I wish I can get closer to you, but I'll walk around. If you visit the Coricancha, which is the Temple of the Sun in Cusco, I don't know if you've been there, but you will see this beautiful representation of the Milky Way. Did you think it was the Milky Way? Yes? No? Maybe? Well, it's the Milky Way on the eyes of a Peruvian artist. As you know, the deities that were venerated in that temple were personified celestial bodies and meteorological phenomena. But in order to understand these beliefs, it is necessary to make reference to the Incan astronomy, of which we know very little through brief mentions in colonial chronicles. You know, the priests that came with the colonizers, they took notes of everything. So they picked up some of that. But also, we know about it from folk astronomy of the Quechua communities today. So the representation here shows the Milky Way over Cusco, Peru, in the months of July and August, when the day is clear and most of the astronomical phenomena venerated by the Incas can be easily observed. Now here is what I wanted, this is the reason why I wanted to show you this to begin with. In Western culture or historical descriptions, when we talk about astronomy, you connect dots, right? Stars, and those form constellations, etc. Unlike the Western constellations composed of stars, the Andean culture distinguishes dark spots against the light background of the Milky Way and identifies them with silhouettes of animals that have come to drink its waters and darken its shining with their shadows. I forgot to mention that in the Andes, the Milky Way is called Mayu, which means celestial river. So these are animals coming to the river to drink water. That's the narrative. Okay? These spots or shadows are called Yanapuyu, which means black clouds. So here on the right side, that right side of the painting, Machawai, or the big water serpent, appears. So can you see the serpent here? That's Machawai. In the center, two small figures, or yutu, a partridge, and hamtatu, a toad, can be seen. They are followed by the female llama with two shining eyes corresponding to the stars Alpha and Beta Centauri. Underneath, in the upside-down position, is her cub, the baby llama. The llamas are chased by the fox with red eyes. In some communities, a figure of a shepherd with his arms extended towards the llamas is seen in place of the fox. His legs coincide with the rear legs of the fox. So there you go. Here's the Milky Way, but it's a narrative completely different from what we have heard from our places in the world. So today I want to invite you to look at the world from a different perspective, and I'm going to walk you through that process. I know what comes next. Oh, there you go, the title. Critical Global Learning. This is the wording that I'm using to talk about critical, multicultural, intercultural competencies. I'm using a critical theory frame, and I'm trying to understand how these set of competencies can be developed while I'm facilitating the learning for my undergraduate students that engage with me both in the classroom research and beyond the classroom research. First, in a world experiencing rapid change where cultural and political and economic and social upheaval challenge traditional ways of life, education has a major role to play in promoting social understanding, peaceful interaction, and positive coexistence at a global scale. UNESCO has produced a number of guidelines to orient what is known as intercultural education. And they suggest that through educational programs that promote and encourage dialogue between students of different cultures, beliefs, and religions, education can make an important, meaningful contribution to sustainable and tolerant societies. That's the language that they have. I think that tolerant societies is not enough, so I'm pushing harder. I'd like to have affirming societies, affirming of everyone, but that's just me. How can schools and universities like ours start an organic process of critically thinking about ourselves as institutions that distinctively embed multicultural education, intercultural education, and global learning? In our experience here in Eau Claire, for example, a major challenge when discussing the issues of multicultural education in global settings through students' re-entry narrative analysis during a period of 3 years appears to be dealing with some of the inherent tensions that arise in any effort to transform old colonial hierarchies and mindsets into democratic relations among cultures, and in trying to reconcile competing worldviews. One significant tension arises from the nature of global learning itself. because it needs to accommodate both universalism and cultural pluralism. So my question is, to what extent are our liberal education, is our liberal education program in our university, in our critical frame of understanding, facilitating and scaffolding such experiential and narrative process, and to what extent is being effectively using to such an ambitious outcome? So that's a big question. This presentation is designed to answer that question from the perspective of two teacher education programs. One, and they are located in two different hemispheres. One is us, our teacher education program at Eau Claire, and the one in the south is the teacher education program of the Pontifical Catholic University in Lima, Peru. We've been working on this since 2015, and we'll continue working together for the next few years because we haven't finished. We think that a north-south dialogue will contribute to the call on all those working toward greater equity in education around the world, collaborating locally and globally to take creative and courageous action that disrupts inequities in education. So for us, our research question remains the same, has remained the same for the last 4 years, and that is, what counts as knowledge? And we want our students to get to decide that, our student researchers to decide that. And this presentation has 3 objectives. The first one is explain the connections between what it means to live in a diverse world with a set of structural elements that embed what it means to work in a democratic, equitable, global environment. 2, to identify a basic set of skills and dispositions that a critical, multicultural educator must develop for global intercultural competence. And finally, introduce very briefly an alternative pattern of collaboration in a global context that systematically redirects the challenges implied in multicultural, intercultural global learning to the structural foundations. How is global knowledge produced? So we ask the first question, what counts as knowledge? But ultimately, we want to understand how what is considered knowledge is actually built. So what is it and how is it done is our main focus for the research. In the field of teacher education, for example, this is particularly evident, not only the need to emphasize the universality of human rights while maintaining cultural difference, which may in fact challenge aspects of these rights, but also in the way in which global learning environments are pedagogically managed. And that's what we are observing, how they manage their learning environment in these learning settings in Peru. Those are real water holes, but they are centuries old and continue to provide water to farmland. This is the south of Lima. Various dissimilar problems that contemporary peoples and communities around the world face are universal, difficult, and unlikely to be solved by one individual. Let's think about access to water, for example. Supplying drinkable water in all parts of the world will require collaboration from people with diverse discipline backgrounds at local, regional, and global levels. But the cultural relationships between water and peoples or communities are complex and vary from place to place. And so does the need to collaborate in ways that acknowledge and honor those cultural differences. To respond to challenges like these, public education must lay the foundation for students to grow into decision makers who are able to recognize and appreciate the difficulties of such endeavors and work together on possible solutions to shared problems, responsibilities, and needs, effectively using their diverse strengths. So that's what we want our teacher candidates to become, the facilitators of those kinds of processes. The efforts to reconcile universalism and cultural pluralism are extremely difficult in a country like Peru, where an inclusive notion of national identity is yet to be forged. Not only there is a long history of systemic discrimination based on race and cultural background, exacerbated by their intersection with other important factors such as class, gender, and language preference, for example, but because of its structural nature, it most likely will take a long time to dismantle. Nevertheless, an important breakthrough has been accomplished in recent years. Public policy has defined the process of national identity formation as an intercultural dialogue. It is not a finalized product. They define it as a process, and has inscribed it within a frame where the local is open to dialogue with the global. In this context, in 2013, our university at Eau Claire and the Catholic University in Peru started an organic process of critically thinking about themselves as institutions that distinctively embed global learning. That is in the teacher education programs. While engaging curricular pursuits in a collaborative fashion through a North-South international partnership certainly offers both hope and possibility, the notion of shaping curriculum from the margins represents a radical idea worth pursuing, because it is not that borders disappear in a globalized world, but actually the periphery becomes the new center. The Peruvian network of schools for high achievement offers us precisely that, an opportunity to engage in intercultural dialogue as a formative process, but at a global scale. For us, as institutions dedicated to the formation of teachers, it has been an opportunity to acknowledge and dialogue about the reality of both a school and a curriculum open to the world. Most of all, it has been an opportunity to carefully listen to diverse points of view in a conversation among Eau Claire and Lima and the network of schools for high-achieving students. We assume it as a part of our responsibility to model for our teacher education students how to develop competencies necessary to engage in dialogue with others, respect diverse points of view, positionalities, and embody a living curriculum nurtured from the diversity of Peruvian and North American cultures, yet open to the whole world. What's special about this network of schools is that students get to these boarding schools from communities from all around the country. It's a highly selective process. I'll explain a little bit more, but these are students that have lived their life in poverty or extreme poverty, and yet have been able to maintain a high level of academic achievement. It's the equivalent of your gifted and talented students from the United States, but they don't go through the process of identifying them in the way we do here. But anyways, they are furnished full ride with world-class education with the purpose of helping them reach their potential. Two of the most significant strategies implemented by the Peruvian government to address diversity in Peru include one, bilingual intercultural education program, and two, the creation of this network of schools. My research focuses on the second one, the network of schools. I'm saving the first element for the future, but they are both connected. This network of schools was created in 2010, geographically located in Lima, the capital city of Peru. This secondary co-ed school received a first cohort of 300 students coming from all different regions of the country. It gathered students who demonstrated the highest achievement, had already completed second, third, and fourth grade of secondary education in public schools around the country, and who would be identified as members of a vulnerable population. These schools are boarding schools that provide holistic education service during the last 3 years of secondary education. The model is framed within the values of equity, freedom, perseverance, respect, and solidarity. The curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular programs are specially designed to address the needs of highly talented students, identified as such by their academic achievement during the first 2 grades of secondary education. They are identified and recruited through a multi-layered competitive process at national level. Its main goal is to help students develop the competencies that will enable them to fully achieve their life project despite the challenges they currently face in an unequal society. My hypothesis is that they constitute the new provincial elites, the new Peruvian provincial elites that will generate structural changes so greatly needed in the country. So this is a project with high political content, and as such has received a lot of resistance from powers that be. Still has endured serious attempts to shut them down, but at this point they are strong and moving forward. And our presence has helped the process because we are talking about them strongly in different spaces. I'm going to skip because I'm running, and I don't want to run short of time. But the acknowledgement of cultural diversity in Peru raises multiple challenges, and we've been able to witness most of them. It is not just about developing an appreciation and respect for the many different cultures that coexist in Peru. The country is also in need of students who are knowledgeable about the world and who have an understanding of how people from other cultures around the world think about the planet they share. Today, depending on how public policy is implemented and how resources are allocated, elementary and secondary schools offer a variety of classes with global learning elements all the way from world languages and social studies to arts, music, and sciences. While the achievement gap is still too wide between the developed and the developing worlds, schools everywhere are nevertheless presented with the challenge to advance critical global learning. Cultivating school cultures that recognize its value and role in well-rounded contemporary education could be very helpful. Even though disparities in access to educational resources in the global commons remain a major challenge, by focusing on what critical global learners can do rather than even for a brief moment on what opportunities they have, we can begin thinking about creative ways in which the gap may be closed. And that's what we've been doing, asking what is it that these kids can do right now. A little bit about the methods that we've been using there. As teacher education programs in the North and South relationship, our ultimate challenge is translating increased awareness about the interaction and intersection of racial, cultural, power, and identity factors, intercultural relations, and language difference dynamics in the global commons into effective teaching practices conducive to the development of individual, critical, global learning competencies and institutional global capacities. To that end, we assembled a research team that includes teacher education majors, all undergraduate students from both universities who were charged with the task of immersing themselves into the life of the schools in order to observe and learn the institutional culture about global learning, inquire what counts as knowledge, and describe how knowledge is constructed. With that purpose in mind, through service learning as teacher aids, ethnographic observation in the classrooms and in the school settings, surveys, interviews, critical reflection, and narrative inquiry. The research teams were asked to make an abstraction of both the secondary Peruvian students and their own global learning experience as student researchers. So it's double layered. The overarching question of this collaborative project is what counts as knowledge, as I mentioned before. But to get a grasp of what that means and secure significant scholarly activity for the student researchers, participant students have prompted and collected the narrative of selected Peruvian students about their own intercultural learning experience at school. They have identified the context within which the narratives were produced, and they have identified the issues of interest that were enacted within those narratives. Simultaneously, our student researchers have elucidated the explicit and implicit communications that might have influenced those narratives. This was really hard to accomplish, but they managed. Identify the role and discourse of other actors and stakeholders included in those narratives. This was also very hard. And they have identified the most relevant issues prominently expressed and or silenced in the context contained in those narratives. To draw a blueprint of an institutional or systemic dominant discourse, participants have used values analysis, plot analysis, significance analysis, character mapping, and time analysis in the deconstruction of the collected narratives. Additionally, after elements of a master narrative were identified, participant student researchers focused on the critical reading of their own narratives of the self to encourage both narrators and readers to assume different stances with the issues of interest in relation to the different audiences, elucidate how narrators have addressed power relations and contested them or not, and infer how and to what extent nuance and displacement persists throughout their own narratives. So we've been reading each other multiple times to pick up all this information. The surveys that we have applied to students in this particular school for 4 years now are 37 questions, but all of them have to do with one of these 4, which are in front of you. To what extent is the student able to adapt and apply his or her own knowledge of diverse cultures, environment, communication styles, and values within his or her national community? To what extent are able to assess global systems or institutions' levels of access to economic resources and relations of power that sustain them in a historical geographical context? To what extent is the student able to use appropriate communication skills in a linguistically and culturally diverse context? And to what extent the student is able to exercise his or her global citizenship through curricular or co-curricular experiences that lead to the understanding that personal and collective decisions are or may have global consequences. These are aligned with the R2 and R1 rubrics. We didn't want to go straight away from them, so we articulate them in the frame. So I'm going to stop here about my research, but I want to share with you some things that I have learned and wanted to share with you this morning. So this is what I've learned about my project, my research project. I have confirmed that the development of critical, multicultural, and intercultural competence in students is largely driven by the formal educational process, what we do in the formal setting, and the cultural diversity of the school or the learning environment. There's a strict correlation there. And there's also a strong correlation between students' critical multicultural and intercultural competence in their inclination towards civic learning and democratic engagement in both global and local settings. The more they feel that they can understand the context, the more inclined they are to engage in a civic way, in a democratic way. to intervene in reality for transformation. Another thing that I have confirmed is that if the teaching and learning environments are teacher-centered, then the development of critical, multicultural, and intercultural competence and the possibility of integrating them to civic learning and democratic engagement is weak. And the opposite is true. In teaching and learning environments that are student-centered, then the corresponding indicators are high. On your tables, I have put some yellow, there's a yellow chart where I have organized a few ideas that I wanted to, I've been sort of following, and I've organized them in these two, this double entry chart. And this is thought for teacher education or future teachers, but it's applicable to other areas. So in the first column, you will see the behavior. How do teacher candidates, blah, blah, blah. And then you have two possible scenarios. One that I call the soft global citizenship education, the very superficial, very innocuous intervention. And then what I call the critical global learning, which is different. So for example, how do teacher candidates define the problem? In the soft version, they talk about poverty, they talk about helplessness. In the critical global learning, they talk about inequality and systemic injustice. These indicators have come from my analysis of student researchers' narratives. Okay, so all of these have their support in research. I just made a simple chart to share with you. How do teacher candidates understand the nature of the problem? In the soft version, they talk about lack of development of education, lack of resources, skills, lack of skills, culture, technology, etc. In the critical frame, they talk about complex structural systems, power relations, and attitudes that create and maintain exploitation and eliminate difference. And so on. You can go to the end, and you see those clear contrasts between the two frames. Just go to the last one. Understand whiteness, white privilege, and white supremacy. In the soft version, they talk about whiteness as an individual attribute. Supremacy includes acts of hate and overt racism. In the critical frame, whiteness is a colonial and ideological construction tied to capital. The structure of society upholds white supremacy. So I found this interesting because it happens with all the student researchers, not just the Eau Claire students, but also with the Peruvian students. But not only with the student researchers that are doing the observation, the field work, it also happens with the Peruvian students at the secondary level. So it has helped me confirm that the same rubric can be used for both kinds of student participants. Some findings that I would like to share from the reading of their narratives of the self is that there's a lot of information about systemic concerns expressed in first person, individual actions, and aspirational civic engagement. They see themselves as agents of change, transformative agents. And the second one, very strong, is that they realize that teaching is a political act when you are trying to push for learning environments that expect that every participant generates or develops critical thinking skills. Some conclusions I share with you about my thinking about the research, not the research itself, but In order to teach for justice-oriented civic learning and democratic engagement, teachers, that is us, must be aware of and accountable to our own positionalities within oppressive structures. Because if we don't, students will. They will highlight our contradictions. The second one, diversity discourse and claims of innocence should be interrupted in order to move from race-evasive identities to informed allies. Most of my students are here are white, so they should understand that they should become informed allies. And then teacher candidates need new frameworks and rhetorical structures to aid the process of becoming racially conscious and to help undo their frameworks in which they are socialized. I'm going to leave the last 5 minutes for questions. I'm sorry, I thought I was going to be leaving 10, but I'll be glad to answer your questions.
First,
I'll ask a question. The observations that you've made and where your research is going, do you feel that those observations apply uniformly across the disciplines, from the humanities to the social sciences to the natural sciences and mathematics? Or do you think that your research is focused on more one end of that spectrum than the other end of the spectrum?
I think that methodology could be used in multiple contexts and multiple disciplines. I've taken a mathematician with me, and he helped me make sense of the projections that because of my humanities formation, I was not able to appreciate in the way that he could. So he was part of my third iteration, and that dramatically changed my perspective. I've had an artist come along last year, and he provided me with some vocabulary and some perspectives that I had not considered before. That informed some of the conclusions. So I think it's transferable, methodologically speaking, but you might be finding things that you might, I found things that I originally did not think about. So I think that's what it is for, right?
Well, yeah, so as a follow-up, so one of the points that you made, and you emphasized, you said teaching is political.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to think, and it might just be that I'm not seeing past my own horizon here, but like, how is teaching mathematics political?
When you help students develop math reasoning skills, you can do it using contexts that are neutral, or you can use it, or you can do it using contexts that are real. For example, if you are helping your students understand what a progression is, you can use data about poverty in Eau Claire to explain the concept of progression. In doing so, you are providing a frame that is connected to higher order thinking skills, and is also connected to ethical frames of understanding. It's not just the math reasoning that is working, but it's working in a context that helps students develop a consciousness, and that consciousness is eminently political.
Thank you.
I have a methodological question,
Yes.
because I know you've taken a different group of students every year. So how does that work as a holistic project? How does the early data get used later in the process, or maybe it doesn't? How does it all link together from year to year with different people involved?
Yes, it's different people, but as you know, I try to bring one from the year before to provide leadership to the following cohort. That helps. All the cohorts that go work with me a semester ahead on the methodology that we use there, and then a semester after to prepare the presentations. So that provides some level of uniformity in terms of the language that we use, the tools that we use, and how we use them. Third, every cohort reads each other. Every cohort member reads each other for consistency, for challenge and consistency. But they also read and challenge previous narratives of the self. But they don't get to read them, but they get to read them only after they've completed their first layer of reading each other with their current cohort. I think that that has helped to maintain coherence in the model. Depending on the area of specialization of the participants, I have, under mastery of the language, Spanish language, I have asked them to read materials written by Peruvian students in Spanish or not. Materials read by Eau Claire students that were really written in Spanish, our Eau Claire students have responded to them in English. So cohorts that came later that were not as fluent in Spanish use those materials written in English as resources for their second layer of thing. So it's all integrated. I confess I did not plan it that way. But that's the way I had to operate, because in the way we plan year by year, for me it was not possible to anticipate who's coming, right? And still, I cannot anticipate who's coming. This summer I'm going with 4 students, 2 males and 2 female students. The 4 of them are fluent in Spanish. And we're going to two new settings, one in Cusco in the highlands and the other one in the rainforest in Madre de Dios. And this is upon request of the Peruvian government. These 2 schools are at the center of a geographical area that is being exploited by many corporations. The one in the highlands are exploiting minerals, and they are entering in conflict with indigenous communities for the use of the land, their ancestral lands, and those are the students that go to the school. So we want to understand, they want us to help them understand how the school is helping them develop those critical global competencies to read their local reality, which is also our global reality. And the same for the school in Madre de Dios, the rainforest. They are located at the center of an area where there is a lot of gold mining that uses mercury. That poison is already in the system of the students that are going to be our subjects, and we want to know how much they can process their local reality in global terms. And then they also are at the center of legal wood forest deforestation. Is that right?
And so those are part of the chain of schools?
Yes.
That chain of schools?
Correct. Well, they have invited us to return to all, and there is a 26, it's a chain of 26 schools. And of course I've said yes, because you know I always say yes. But I need at least 80 blue goals to come along with me in the next 10 years, which, you know, is doable. But, you know, I'll start with 2. 2 sides and 4 students.
So with the question of what counts as knowledge, the students, I assume they're asking that of like the students or the teachers they work with and of themselves, or how are they sort of?
The students decide that.
Okay,
When we ask
so
them,
that's sort of their narrative reflection.
because we're considering that what the students say, both the students in the schools and the Eau Claire students and the Catholic University students, that is institutional discourse. Because what they are able to do and say is an outcome of institutional efforts. So we're just assuming all that is institutional discourse. Unless proved the contrary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and just for the Blue Gold students who are coming back, have they sort of changed their idea of what counts as knowledge?
Yes, there's a transformation in terms of consciousness, political consciousness, and there's a transformation also in terms of how they perceive themselves as educators, and also growing awareness of this additional set of soft skills needed to facilitate social change, right? They see themselves as strong persuasers, I don't know if that's a word, but they experience that they are better at persuading about their ideas.
Just as a comment, I'll be interested to hear when you come back to the school where they're doing the gold mining, where they're using a lot of mercury as part of the processing and it's contaminating the water and the air and things like that. I'll be interested to see if you feel that those students or the teachers in that community somehow are a tad different than the other students in the network, because mercury is a neurotoxin and it affects brain development,
Yes.
as well as kidneys and other things. So you almost wonder, will their cognitive development, depending on their level of
I'm
exposure,
very intrigued about
you know,
that too.
compared to other students at the same grade level who are otherwise getting similar education through the network,
Yeah.
you know, but because they've experienced this environmental exposure, do they somehow, you know, are they somehow systematically different?
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
Sure, I'll get that information. I'll ask the question because I am intrigued.
Yeah, I mean, you know.
Maybe you can tag along, come down.
I
To
was
do
gonna
Is that
say,
what
maybe
you were
we need-
angling for?
Maybe you need an epidemiologist to
Yeah.
run.
You
Yeah.
know, yeah, I'm just
Sure,
thinking of the
yes.
environmental
I am
exposure
interested
changes
because, you
that-
know, these kids would have gone to Lima to school, but then to avoid the shutdown of the project, what they did is they replicated it in 26 different parts, so that the population could own them and protect them. Now it's not possible to close them. Now they're at a time when they need to do better what they've been doing so far.
So these are government run
Yes, it's fully
schools?
funded with taxes. Students don't pay anything. They get everything they need.
So the government is investing in providing power in the grassroots level.
Correct. That's what I'm saying, my hypothesis, this is the new provincial elites that will generate that structural change. Because they are, you know, help to grow this level of consciousness. You need to, we're helping you to reach your potential, but you will be committed to your local community and provide leadership.
And then you were saying there was resistance to that sort of movement as far as who is resisting?
Those, like, in our case, would be those who promote private education and want them to go to the private school rather than to the publicly funded school. And those, and then the local elites that don't want their power challenged, right? These new elites will have their power of influence based on their ability to persuade, their ability to produce knowledge, versus the traditional elite that have the power because of the accumulation of wealth.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
Do you know if there's anything like this in another country?
There isn't. I presented this research 2 weeks ago in Amsterdam at the International Association for Intercultural Education. And I was just flooded with questions, requests from data, of my data, and invitations to present. Because they don't know of any other experience like this. Actually, I was harassed by someone from Chile saying, you need to give me all this information. We don't have this, we need this. And so, you know, I'm very liberal. I give everything. I give everything. And so we'll see where that leads to. I am very thankful for the support and ORSP and my colleagues in
International fellows.
in the College of Education, because they've been very supportive of this. And our goal in the teacher education program is to offer a certificate in critical global learning that is embedded in our regular teacher education program, so that when they graduate with their degree and they get their license, they also have this certification that says they have a concentration in critical global learning. Hopefully that will make them more competitive.
And you're doing similar programs domestically?
Yes.
Where are those programs?
We have one local, we go to Milwaukee, and then we go to Beltsville, Maryland, and Washington DC, and then we go to Tucson, Arizona. Those are settings where we go to work with schools and teachers, seasoned teachers that do culturally relevant education, and students are successful. So that's what our teacher candidates don't see, right? They associate students of color with failure. So we take them to places where students of color are successful. So that puts them in a different, that puts them out of the comfort zone and in a different context. So they challenge what they think they know, and that starts a nice process of growing awareness. As of next year, we will be taking students to Puerto Rico, which is domestic, but it's also global. Based on this fact, I've been teaching for years this class, ES490, which is Historical Foundations of Education. I have found very, very few students who I can count with fingers on one hand that know why Puerto Rico is U.S. territory. So I felt the need to take them and show them what's going on. After that, I don't know if you know this, but after the hurricane hit the island 2 years ago, there's this push to turn all public schools into charter schools. And teachers are up in arms. So I've contacted teachers from San Juan, and they're welcoming us to show what they're doing and model for them some strategies for non-formal education and adult education, which is what they do to raise awareness.
Well, I hate to cut this off,
Oh.
but I think we're,
Okay.
we need to let our videographer go.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.